Devon, how about those Cowboys?
How about those Cowboys? Let's talk about that. But that game last night was, boy, I watched like the first half of it, and then I'm just like, I don't need to watch the rest of it. I just went to bed.
You just went to bed in full bliss.
I did.
I tell you what did not help me is that I think CD Lamb only got 7 points in that particular game, which is like fine, but it's not what I drafted, Devon. It's not what I drafted.
So we're doing the fantasy football pivot, right?
Yeah. There's a lot of space in the fantasy football market.
So much space.
I don't know if you've ever tried to break into it, but maybe someone on this podcast has before.
Instead of the Dive Down podcast, we can call it the Touchdown podcast.
The touchdown.
Oh man, the first down. We have various segments.
So there's a lot of downs.
Oh man, there's so many.
It's true.
Yeah, I mean, hope all you who celebrate the fantasy football season are enjoying your first week or lamenting all of your life choices that led up to the first week.
As usual.
Yeah, Dave and I were talking about this before. I'm up 24. My opponent has the Buffalo rookie tight end Kincaid and Josh Allen left. So we'll have to see what happens with the game tonight. If it even apparently there's some weather warnings, but we'll have to see.
They said that that one quarterback for the Packers, what's his name?
Jordan Love?
No, the old one. No, the one. No, the Jets. The Jets now.
Right.
The ayahuasca guy?
Yeah, ayahuasca guy. Apparently, he's already off the field after 20 seconds.
What?
Really? got a bad sack.
Oh, the game started? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Blanco Nino. Too bad your butt got sacked. Hello and welcome to episode 240 of The Dive Down, a Magic the Gathering podcast focused on the latest decks, trends, and strategies for the casual spike. My name is Shane here in Denver, Colorado. With me on the line from Massachusetts, it's the one and only Devon O'Donnell, aka Doomwake.
I haven't been here in a while. How you guys been?
It feels like forever. Yeah. Every time. I'm fine. It's becoming fall here in Denver. The leaves are starting to turn. The footballs are starting to throw.
More importantly, the footballs.
Yeah. How's everything for you?
It's been good. Doing a lot of streaming, doing a lot of weekend tournaments, which we may or may not talk about later today. It's been
hopefully
it's been
they're in the notes. If we skip those,
we're definitely talking about it because there's no show without that, Devon. So I hope you're ready to talk about yourself for a little bit.
I'm down.
That's the Godfather Dave Harbarger with us from Chicago. David, how are you?
I'm here. We did it
that
again.
Good, huh? Another week.
I just had the longest weekend ever.
A good or bad way?
It was fun, but like trying to just hang out with a lot of people as people are back from summer vacation. Everybody wants to hang out. Guys, I went and played some Commander this weekend.
Again?
I went and played some Commander at an LGS this weekend. Look at Devon's face. Devon's like, I can't even.
Wow.
I will say, I do have 2 Commander decks as well, so.
Let's hear. All right, give me the commanders. We won't go too deep in this. What are they?
Tevish and Timna, and then the one that makes the 1/4 black-red guy that makes treasures. I think it's called like Prosper or something. I think that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But those are the 2 decks.
Yeah, I have Ken from Street Fighter.
Heck yeah.
And I have Light Paws are the 2 that I made, and I got destroyed. And it was really lovely to hang out with one of my son's schoolmates' dads, who's very into Commander. So I went down the LGS to meet him and played with some of his friends, and they're very nice people. I don't get Commander. I don't get it. I don't get it. I'm sorry.
Well, when we pivot into our sister podcast, the EDH Down or something like that, then you'll have to learn more, Dave.
So it's going to be a fantasy football and EDH podcast, right?
And movies.
Oh, right. Movie reviews for.
Yeah,
we watch an entire overview of a single director.
Yeah, there's a lot of space for all those podcasts: EDH, fantasy football, and movie critique from 3 talking head dudes.
You know, Dave, I will have to say I let you down. I told you at the end of the last episode that I was going to watch some kind of monster, and I haven't gotten around to it.
Oh,
I need to.
I do think you need to. Shane, have you seen some kind of monster?
No. Besides the one in my dream last night.
You've never seen that Metallica documentary?
No, I know. We've talked about how I should see it, and you like it very much. I think it lives in your head rent free, as they say.
It does. There's incredible moments between Lars Ulrich and his father that really cannot be missed. But
speaking of incredible moments,
between someone's and their fathers,
yes, you can have some incredible moments at your LGS, your next tournament, by using heavy play card gaming accessories. Improves your gameplay and your game day, as we like to say. That rhymed. I did not intend for that to rhyme. Their playmats, deck boxes, and card sleeves feature enhanced ergonomics, enhanced mobility, enhanced protection. Of course, the big sell here is the Equip Mag system. It allows you to attach all your deck and dice boxes together. You can attach those to your playmat. You carry it all in a single hand. You just kind of slide the unit into your backpack nice and cleanly, whatever you want to do. What I really like is, I mentioned this a couple weeks ago, I think, is the ability, you can basically create your own multi-deck carrying thing where you sort of like snap a couple decks around like one of the dice boxes. You don't have to figure out, hey, is my cool D20 or my cool D6s in this case? So I got to move the cards around. You just grab what you need to and go. You can get this stuff over at heavyplay.com. You can use code TheDiveDown2023 for 10% off your first order. And I believe it's also coming soon, if not already, at your LGS. So go over to heavyplay.com, use code TheDiveDown2023, and that lets Randy over to HeavyPlay know that you heard about him through us. But let's talk about this week's show. We have stuff from Wilds of Eldraine. These cards are doing things in Pioneer, they're doing things in Modern. So we're going to talk about what is popping up on our radar, on the Twitter radar, in the 5.0 lists, the challenges, things like that. Kind of what our thoughts are about some of these cards and decks, and hopefully what has some staying power after our initial tests and tests in the field. Devon's back, as we mentioned. He's going to take us through some of his initial testings of new cards, especially in Pioneer. But we also have a nice, we'll just call this the breakdown section, where Devon's going to talk about his recent success in Modern. Weird. Devon playing Modern.
Weird, I know, right?
Mono-Black Coffers, the latest deck of choice.
But successful wherever he goes. That's what I want to underline. Devon, successful wherever he goes, even in his fandom of the Cowboys, as we mentioned, after week one.
It's true.
That week one game has to be the most embarrassing loss that I've ever seen in a week one, like Dallas rivalry game. It's got to be up there.
Wow. Calling him out.
I don't have a take on that, but I agree with you.
I mean, 40-0 is a lot. That's a high score. I did watch the Browns Bengals game for our Battle of Ohio, by the way, and neither of the teams that I'm particularly interested in anymore. But wow, did Cincinnati look bad? Wow,
Browns defense is legit.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
First, we're going to do some housekeeping.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Dave.
Want to say thank you to 3 new patrons we had this week. We have JJW. Yes. Which is someone who is just letters, apparently. JJW, thank you for joining.
JJ Dubs.
Porter B and David A. David, welcome to the David crew. Hit me up on Discord if you want to talk with the other Davids.
Is that perhaps JJ Watt?
He's got a lot of time on his hands.
Never know.
He has retired. I mean, those sports people like spending their money on expensive Magic cards.
It's just Hunter Pence.
Well, that's a sports person.
Yeah, that's us.
Now we have 2. Person. JJ Watt. You think he'd be more than like $1 patron, JJ Watt?
Oh, this is not. No, JJW, by the way, big ups. Not an entry level patron, JJW. Thank you so much, JJW.
Thanks, Dubs.
So if you would like to support us on Patreon, check us out at patreon.com/thedivedown. You can leave a review on iTunes if you want to. You can answer questions on Spotify if you want to get up in there and talk to us. You can answer a question like the pre-filled question that is, what did you think about this episode? Is attached to every single episode on Spotify now. So get in there and make some answers if you'd like us to see them. I read all of those responses. You can also support us via buying merchandise on our store at thedivedown.com/store. It's fall. Get a hoodie. Get a hat. Get a knit cap. We have the Dive Down knit caps. They're there for you. Toques. Yeah, they call them toques over in the UK. If you would like to check out Mana Traders, Mana Traders is the rental service that I used to rent the deck that I played this week, and a deck that I didn't quite get to play, but I still have it rented and sitting in my account, and I will go back and play it after this. That is manatraders.com. Use code the Dive Down 2023.
Nope. This is our new code, Dave.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The Dive Down 23.
The Dive Down 23. Just 23. Use code the Dive Down 23 to get 10% off your first 2 months of Mana Traders rentals.
Perfect.
Great. And I really stuck the landing on that.
Yeah, it's perfect. We got Beresford Man, our friends with soaps and shaving soaps and fragrances and more. Use code the Dive Down 23 there as well for 15% off your first order. And then our friends over at NRG give our listeners 8% off their online orders with the code DIVE8.
And that's it.
That's it.
That's the intro. Okay, we're going to break our discussion of Wilds of Eldraine and just kind of Magic in general this week into 2 buckets. We're going to talk about Modern, and then we're going to talk about Pioneer. Everybody on board with that?
Both ways to play Magic in one episode?
Yeah, exactly. Wow. Both ways to play Magic, except for Commander. Check out our new podcast, The Command Down. Get to the chopper if you'd like to. So, Devon.
Dave, let's talk about Mono-Black Coffers if we're going to talk about a little bit of Modern.
Sweet. I think we should do that. I really, before we dive into this, I just want to say, since you haven't been on the show in a few weeks, I want to say congratulations for winning Challenge a couple weeks ago.
Well, thank you.
I don't know if I've ever spoken to a Challenge winner so close to when they won a challenge. So, congrats to you.
It's an honor.
I hope it was a good run. Definitely watched that top 4 as closely as I could. Ended up switching between you and Spike at different moments. I really thought it was going to happen, where it was going to be you versus Evert against each other.
God, that would have been so good. The streamer finals.
Oh, yeah.
I couldn't tell. I was watching the finals, and I think you took game 1, and then you go to sideboarding, and I didn't have the audio on when you went back into the second game, and I was you looked kind of behind, early on. I don't know if you remember this because you play a lot of games, but then you were just they just conceded. I don't remember what you did. Did you play a gigantic walking ballista or something and clear their board? I don't even remember what the heck happened that just let you take over the game so conclusively.
So that game, I think I remember that game. I was behind most of the game, and there was a sequence where I had to go very low, and I had to Bowmaster to kill a blocker, chump block a couple of creatures, and then hope to ring into Damnation, which I was able to barely survive, ring, rip the Damnation, kill their board. Eventually, I think I found a march to stabilize, gain a bunch of life. But yeah, I was behind a lot of that game. And that's the thing about this deck is you have a lot of comeback mechanics or comeback tools, the ways to, get back in the game. And that's what I like so much about it.
Sweet.
All right. Now that we've given a tiny spoiler, this is why you should stay, Devon. You've been playing a lot of Mono-Black Coffers lately.
I have.
What's up with that?
So there was the challenge, which was pre-Wilds of Eldraine. That was the challenge that I won. And then the week after, this past Sunday, so yesterday, I played the Super Qualifier for, against my better judgment. I played 10 rounds of Magic Online. I don't know why I did that, but I ended up going 8-2 in that event. So combined in total, the challenge, the Super Qualifier, and a league, that's where I started it. Funny enough, this actually all started from somebody who submitted a dono deck, and they did a dono deck for Coffers, but with the troll. And I was like, okay, this looks interesting enough. 5-0'd the league, and then just been refining it since then.
Awesome.
But combined all 3 of those, 22-3 across those 3 events.
Dang.
Yeah, the deck is I don't know what it is, because I thought this was mostly a meme deck at first. When I think I was Spike was the first person I saw playing it. And I thought to myself, how is this better than just playing Tron or any sort of other big mana deck? And I think that's what a lot of people assume when they kind of look at the deck on first glance. But the more you play with it, you realize, and Dave and I can have a discussion on what we want to classify this deck is. It's a mid-range deck, okay? It is a mid-range deck that at the end of the day, you are playing with Thoughtseize, Fatal Push, creatures. It is a mid-range deck, and that's what makes it so good. You have a mid-range deck that has this insane late game that can just go over the top of everybody.
Devon, I don't know if I'm ever going to recover from this, because Stan is going to hear this
maybe
and yell at me about it. Although I will say, this deck is constructed now is kind of different from the other one that we talked about a month ago or so, where we were talking about control versus mid-range or whatever. And hey, it's all a spectrum anyway, right? We're all doing different roles and different things that we do, and that's fine. That's cool.
And I control the edit this week, so I can make Devon say whatever I want.
True.
Perfect.
Devon, can you say read the word I have written here that says control so I can splice that in?
Right.
Mid-range.
Okay, so anything notable from the matchups that you've had across all of these leagues that you want to talk about? Because I know we talked about the combined record, but you're also keeping track of individual matches. I can see here in the notes. So what stands out to you from this?
Well, 6-1 against Rhinos. I don't know if Shane wanted me to say that on the
Don't
podcast,
believe his lies.
I do think the deck is quite favored against Rhinos. Sagavon 3-0. One thing, I mean, that's your Sagavon is I think a pretty easy matchup because they're a mid-range deck at heart, but they don't have the ability to go over the top like you do. So you're kind of just like trading blows for each other or with each other in the first couple of turns, and then you play a Coffers and they can't win. Tron 3-0, which I was very shocked at. I thought the Tron matchup was going to be atrocious because they're like one of the few decks in the format that can go bigger than you. But I will say playing, 7 or 8 Field of Ruins does help a lot because you can just kind of like try to keep them off kilter for a little bit. And then the turn that you don't field them, you finally just go Coffers Karn. And then that's kind of a big turn. 2-0 against Scam, 2-0 against Murktide. I think those are close-ish matchups, but, kind of caught some breaks there. Past that, nothing too crazy. The rest of these are, there's not a ton of sample sizes. And at the end of the day, these are small sample sizes. This is just from those 3 events, by the way.
Okay. That's a lot of Rhinos across 25 matches for what it's worth. Interesting.
Yeah, I think Rhinos might be one. Rhinos has to be one of the probably the most played deck online right now. I play against it a lot. Yeah. Especially in the big events. I think people gravitate towards it in those bigger events.
All right. So we did talk about this deck like before the Pro Tour when we were talking about the emergence of blue-black control and this deck, and then I forget the deck that Shane talked about that in a particular episode. So why don't we talk about what's maybe changed about this deck over the last 6 weeks, because it's a not insignificant number of cards that have kind of moved around, and then I'd love to talk about what you think about the individual cards as well, kind of where you're coming from when you're playing them.
Right, exactly. Now I'm just going to pull up my challenge list because the challenge list is a little bit different than the one from yesterday. And just give me a second to pull this. It's 4 cards different. So again, when I won the challenge, we didn't have access to the Wilds of Eldraine cards. So the new additions, well, I guess we'll just go over the card. We can kind of just go over some of these sort of one by one because they're not the most, like some of these aren't the most, like not a lot of people play these cards. And specifically, I want to start with the Troll of Khazad-dûm.
Right.
As we mentioned earlier, a lot of Coffers lists that I look at, a lot of them sometimes have Night's Whisper in this spot or some sort of other card draw spell like that. But the reason I like this card so much is what happens in a lot of people don't realize this, and they kind of conceptualize cards in deck list in the best possible scenario. Like, what does this look like if my draw is firing on all cylinders, right? So you talk about like curving up perfectly, like Thoughtseize into a 2-drop, into a 3-drop, and go from there. But the thing about Magic is that doesn't always happen. Your draw fails sometimes. And the best part about Troll is it's kind of good in both stages of those, where you can cycle it early if you need a land drop. And then later in the game with Cabal Coffers, you have an abundance of mana and, you just have a 6/5.
So literally Magic as Garfield intended.
Basically, yeah.
Cycling early, option late. Option early, option late.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that really stands out to me about this card being picked up in this deck is that going hand in hand with Lorien Revealed being picked up in so many different blue decks for reasons that are sort of below the surface about the card in a lot of ways, are all of these search cycle cards just better and more playable than we thought? Like, are we going to start, is there any chance that we start seeing people just playing Generous Ent in like other random lists other than Living End, for example? Is there a chance that the white card gets picked up in lists at some point? If there's like a pitch card synergistic white list that emerges eventually, are these cards just all better than we thought?
I mean, I definitely have heard people talking about like their testing. I remember people like I listened to a few podcasts where, post Pro Tour, people who had like guests on and stuff like that talking about their testing, and they were like, yeah, we just we ran decks with some of these cyclers in them, and I know some people have been testing them in certain amounts. I think that there are options here, right, where it's just like, hey, this is a good card, and land cycling in a format like Modern is really good. Have you done any experimentation or seen any kind of surprising stuff with the cyclers, Devon?
So I haven't done a ton myself, but I have seen. So I remember you guys talked about the Tron deck that played Generous Ent a couple weeks ago. So there was that. There was that aspect. Dom Harvey played Generous Ent at Amulet of the Pro Tour. I've seen scam decks that have incorporated both Troll and Oliphant in kind of like this persist package, where if you play like max Oliphants and Trolls, you can then make your deck a persist deck while also just kind of shaving on lands, and you get higher spell count for the pitch cards. So I've kind of honestly seen all of them except the white one, but I also just think that the most popular white decks are Hammer Time, and it's like Hammer Time's never going to get the 6 mana to cast that thing.
No home for that. How many lands do you think you get to shave for playing this card? For example, if you were playing Night's Whisper over Troll in this particular list, what do you think that swap would be?
Well, most Cabal Coffers lists that I've seen play somewhere between 26 and 27 lands, and I've decided to go with 23 plus the 3 Trolls. So I guess you could say that I kind of shaved a land, sort of. Although I think personally, even if I wasn't playing Troll, I'd still probably only play 26 lands. So it's kind of just like a straight up 1-for-1. I just got 3 lands for 3 Trolls.
That's fascinating to me. That's something I think people should keep in mind as they're starting to brew in Modern and also have more sets emerge from here. But yeah, cool. I mean, Troll is definitely a cool part of the list that you have, and kind of where you were at, and what your, as you mentioned, one of your subscribers supplied to you in a donation.
I know, yeah. Big shout out. And yeah, the other thing that the Troll, so it's kind of weird because it does kind of mess up your draws sometimes, where if you're trying to you do have games where you're like, you want to turn 1 Thoughtseize, turn 2 Bowmaster, and then like sometimes it kind of messes up your curve. But also with the addition of Talisman, if you need to hit a land drop, you can just go Talisman on 2 and then use the mana from the Talisman to cycle the Troll, and there's your land drop on turn 3, and then you get 4 mana and go from there.
Should we talk about Talisman next? There's other cards in your list, but do you want to talk about Talisman by itself really quickly? Because you did run between last week when you won and this week with the new list, and there's another reason for that, so we don't have to get into a new card if you don't want to, but Talisman of Resilience is in your deck, and so people remember that's the Golgari Talisman.
Are we just out here running Talismans now in our decks?
Couple of decks are.
Well, so it's kind of weird because you'll notice in the notes I kind of put them together, and that's because we kind of need to talk about one if we're going to talk about the other. So the package deal here is 2 Talisman, and I will say I messed up the Talismans. They should be split for engineered explosive purposes. Initially in my head, I played the Golgari one because I thought I was going to sideboard Haywire Might, but then I was like, I can't really activate it on 2 green sources, so it wasn't worth it, but I just forgot to change the Talismans. But the new card here from Wilds of Eldraine, Beseech the Mirror, which is, I think, probably the card that had the most hype surrounding it when the set came out, and it still appears to be that, because I think it's the most expensive card by a lot.
It is, although I have something to add to that list later. We might want to compare prices, because stuff went wild over the weekend, Devon.
Okay.
But yeah.
Well, I was told, so somebody, I think I was at FNM when Spike made the tweet about Beseech being bad or something like that, and somebody told me that, like, I think Beseech tanked like $20 right after Spike tweeted that or something.
God, he moves markets.
I know.
Oh, yeah.
That's wild. But anyway.
More often when something's good.
Right. And that's what we'll talk about in a moment. But so Beseech plus Talisman.
Yes, this is the package deal. So Beseech the Mirror is, for those of you who don't know, it's black, 1, sorcery, bargain. Bargain means you can sack an artifact, enchantment, or token. If you cast the spell, if you bargained it, you get to search your library. Well, first of all, you search your library for any card, no restrictions. If you bargained it, if that spell is 4 mana or less, you can play it for free. So, well, not only does Talisman's perfect for this because it ramps you into a turn 3 Beseech, so you can go turn 2 Talisman, turn 3, 4 mana with 3 lands in the Talisman. It gives you an artifact to sacrifice to the bargain, which means you can just go, sacrifice the Talisman, get a ring, play it for free. So that's very powerful. Now, what I kind of learned after playing this package deal, because you kind of you don't really want to play Beseech unless you have the talismans, because you just need more fodder to bargain. But one thing I kind of learned when I was playing this is I question why we didn't just play talismans all along. Like the deck is playing 10 4-drops. How would nobody thought of these talismans before? Because you just go turn 2 talisman, turn 3 ring, and that's really good. You know?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. You don't see a lot of mana rocks in Modern, but maybe there's space for a couple in these control decks that can really. I'm just kidding.
Well, no, I thought you were talking about blue-black, because the blue-black deck's the same thing, right? Because it plays Shieldred, Ring, all the subtlety, you know what I mean? Right. So, like, maybe people should just be playing more talismans. I don't know.
Just a couple of them.
That's what I learned.
But here's the thing that struck me when I was reading you talking about Beseech in the before we got on this call, before we got on to record this episode. I was looking at this list and I was thinking a little bit about like, okay, well, when you mentioned that you get to run a package of kind of one-ofs occasionally as part of Beseech being here. So you can shave on a damnation. You can shave maybe on some other pieces of removal. You don't have a ton of one-ofs in here in this particular list, but it struck me a little bit like, is this kind of like Bring to Light essentially in this deck, which is I think a little bit different because a lot of people I think were assuming that Beseech was only going to be part of broken things or like trying to cheat, trying to do combos. And this is really just playing Beseech for value and optionality, right?
Yeah, I think the reason it's so good in this deck is because this is probably the best ring deck in the entire format. It's one that you just have an overabundance of mana, and we have life gain cards that we'll get to in a second.
Mm-hmm.
But for all of those reasons, I think this might be the deck that utilizes ring the best, and just having more copies of that. Like now, if you effectively think about it, you have 3 rings, 4 Karns, and 2 Beseeches. You're like, the odds that you're going to ring on turn 3 or turn 4 are extremely high. Well, maybe not turn 3 as much because you need Talisman, but like on turn 4, most of the time you're going to have a ring.
Right.
And that's kind of the important part. And yeah, like I ended up shaving, I think the cards that I cut from the challenge list, like I'm pulling it up right here. So I cut a Bloodchief's Thirst, a Cling to Dust, a Damnation, and the extra land. I had 24 lands plus the 3 Trolls in the challenge list. So those were the 4 cards that I cut for 2 Talismans, 2 Beseeches. It's kind of weird too, because there were a couple of spots where I did kind of want the second Damnation, and not just like because that I wanted to just like draw it, but I had used it early and I just kind of needed it, to Beseech for it later on. So, there are downsides to going to 1 copy, but and Shieldred also extremely important, another card that you can Beseech into with the ring and all that.
Right. And you're only running 2 of those in this list too. So it is sort of like a search target in that sense too, because you don't draw into it as much as some of the other cards.
I know this is not the order that you have your cards in, but I think in terms of the order, in terms of like the order that we're talking about, it's like I think the One Ring has had a little bit of a journey, right? Where it's like I think it came out of the gates, people really afraid of it trying to be slotted into a number of decks. I think most of those decks have gone back somewhat to some of their original builds. Some have kept it. How is the One Ring feeling for you? It sounds like you want to be playing this on turn 3, turn 4, and just getting max value out of it, drawing a bunch of cards. Is it kind of like where you're at with it in this deck? Is this like the ideal play, or is like Karn the ideal play, or?
I mean, as far as just my general thoughts on the ring, I think it's the best card in the format. I don't think it's close. It's just a broken card.
Still.
It is like, I don't know. Every time I play with and against it, I'm just like, how did they print this card? Like what? There's so many things they could have done. And we can, that's a whole nother episode.
Other thing. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like the card is just so good. Again, because with Cabal Coffers and Urborg in tandem, you just have an abundance of mana in so many different spots. And I think that's what makes it so powerful, is just like finding ways to utilize those extra cards. And the really cool thing about this deck too is you have all of those cheap cards too. So, we talked about how this deck is like, can kind of play like a mid-range deck. Well, if you have Ring and you're like, let's say you have Ring, but you don't have Coffers and you have like, 4 or 5 mana, you get to play a 4-drop, and then you can always use that leftover mana because you have so many 1-drops to cast. And that's kind of where, there's other 1-drops too. But yeah, I think this is probably the best Ring deck in my experience.
Yeah, I've And then my next question was Shieldred. Like, you mentioned having the availability of tutoring her up with Beseech the Mirror, and I've seen some highlights when Dimir was being played a little bit more, which of course also features the One Ring and Shieldred. And once you have a Shieldred and the One Ring in play, the game is trivial, it seems.
Yeah, easily. Yeah, I mean, once if you have Shieldred in play and you activate the ring and you're able to gain, 4 or 6 life or whatever, and 5 toughness, kind of a lot. There's like Lightning Bolt doesn't touch it, Fury doesn't touch it, blocks rhinos. I know Shane loves me to talk about rhinos, so
shh, don't tell people Shieldred is good.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild. The trick that I pulled when I was playing Shieldred in the One Ring a bunch of times was like, you get to your turn where the upkeep trigger goes, and then you activate the ring in response to the trigger. So you gain the life from Shieldred from the extra card, and then you take the extra damage. Sure, that's fine, but you give yourself that extra, point of life, that extra card and stuff right there. And it's powerful synergy for sure.
Yeah, and so I know we're kind of jumping around a little bit, but let's talk about Bowmaster here.
Okay.
So because we kind of went through the Beseech and the Talisman. So I have 4 copies of Orcish Bowmaster, and I had it both in the challenge list and the super qualifier list. And I've seen a lot of Cabal Coffers decks that don't play the full 4 copies of this. Now, so with the Beseech the Mirror, like, it does give you more reason to have the token because you need a token to sacrifice. So a very common play pattern is you'll play Bowmaster, and you'll maybe pick something off, and then you'll use the token to be able to beseech it away. But it's just like, the card itself is just so good. Like, it's 2 bodies, it kills a creature, you can like, you get the chump blockers and stuff. It's just, I don't know, I can't imagine playing a Coffers deck without 4 copies, and it still seems wild to me that people don't want to play 4.
It's just one of the best 2-drops in Modern, right? Like, I mean, by far. Yeah, I mean, we certainly were not convinced coming into the set coming out, but it is an incredible card, and it does a lot of stuff. And I don't know why you would play a mono-black deck or any deck that has black in it and not play a play set of them. I can't imagine there's that many better cards.
Yeah, and then, so I guess we'll talk about the next card here, because another kind of sort of, not really a combo with it, but March of Wretched Sorrow. And Bowmaster gives you another body for the March of Wretched Sorrow. The full 4 copies of this card. And I think, again, a lot of Coffers decks I've seen some that don't play 4, some play like 2 or 3 copies. But what's really important about this card in the Coffers decks is when you have the ring going, you really can find yourself in spots where you just need to gain a little bit of life. And just being able to do it, if you have a Coffers or 2 in play, and you just be able to like tap the ring a couple of times while you're getting pressured. I played against Burn a couple of times, and there were just spots where I would just filter a bunch of mana into Coffers when they like tap out end of turn for a burn spell, and they're going shields down on Skullcrack, and it's just, I don't know, pitch my entire hand and gain 20 life. They can't win. But a lot of times it just kind of comes up with the ring and stuff. And what's really important about like specifically Bowmasters with that is it gives you an extra body. So you can go like play Bowmaster, get 2 bodies, block with one of them, and then use the other body to like weird spots where you like untap, ring trigger on the stack, march my own guy to gain life to not die, and do stuff like that. So the life gain is just massively important. And you're drawing a bunch of cards off ring, which means you might just have a bunch of stuff to pitch to it.
Yeah. I mean, this card, I would just point out really quickly, it doesn't matter. This is one of those ones where it's not worded to say that only the damage that actually gets dealt to the creature or only resolves on the creature is what you gain life for. You gain life for whatever you pump into it. So whatever target you can find, whatever card you can find to target with this, like Devon said, you can gain 20 life if you can pump enough mana into it, even if you hit a 1/1 with it. So it totally makes sense. It's kind of like drain life. If you remember, like way back in the day, and like mono-black like decks that played that. Yeah, sure. Necro helped you with that. It's a great, considering that people kind of have compared the One Ring to Necro a bunch of times. Like drain life. This is your drain life. Totally.
Do you think that the ability to gain life from March, the ability to gain life from Shieldred, does that give this deck kind of outs that you wouldn't have otherwise? Where it's like, hey, I can just keep grabbing cards with this One Ring because I know I can make up for it with these 2 cards specifically.
Oh yeah, just tap it every turn. You'll eventually figure it out. Like the thing is, other thing that I forgot to mention about Beseech with the bargain, you can sack ring to it. So that comes up as well. If you're going too deep on a ring, you can eventually find it. But yeah, between you have enough copies of the ring between the ring itself, Karn, and Beseech to sacrifice it, and then you have the life gain with March of Wretched Sorrow. Even Cling to Dust, like there's been spots where I've gone a little bit too deep on ring and I just find the Cling and I have extra mana with my coffers and I can just Cling, escape Cling, gain 6 and then go from there. So you do have a lot of life gain.
Wow. Anything else you want to talk about on the interaction suite here? So you just talked about Cling to Dust and Bloodchief's Thirst. There's also 2 Sheoldred's Edicts and 4 Thoughtseize, 4 Push. I mean, a lot of this stuff feels kind of like what you would expect in a black deck, but anything you want to say about the particular composition of your interaction suite right now?
Thoughtseize, Push. I don't, we probably don't need to spend time on those. If you're playing black, you should play Thoughtseize, Fatal Push. Those cards are great. The Sheoldred's Edicts, though, those are, so I think some lists play 1 or 2. So I've seen, I think I've actually seen 4 copies before, but I don't know if I'd play 4. But it's nice because it's instant speed. It gets planeswalkers and it gets getting creature tokens. It just the fact that it can kill kind of anything. And the one also important thing is it gets around Veil of Summer. So post board, if you Edict their Teferi and they have Veil of Summer, they can't really do that.
Yeah.
Because it says each opponent, which is very, very important. It's a way to kill big Murktide regions that you weren't able to kill. Kills Grist against Yawgmoth, which is huge. Just a very, very, very solid card.
Yeah, totally agree. I played against it in Pioneer this week, and it was never ceased to amaze as well, even there.
And then I think that's pretty much it. I mean, we could touch on the Bloodchief's Thirst, Cling to Dust. Bloodchief's Thirst is it's kind of just your 5th Fatal Push. You'd probably play 4 or 5 Fatal Pushes if you could, but they only let you play 4 copies of a card, unfortunately. And then the Cling to Dust, we kind of went into that, why it's so good. Just being able to just having stuff that you can use your excess mana, because you do generate a boatload of mana sometimes when you have coffers going, and just being able to you turn that into cards to help you find more rings to keep going off, or the life gain that we talked about when you're going off with ring. Very, very important with the Cling to Dust.
Awesome. The other interesting thing I saw about this is that in the super qualifier, the person who I think was in first place coming out of the Swiss was also on coffers.
Yep.
Is that right? _STN_?
Pulling up their list right now, so we could take a look at how different it is. I think this might be...
I don't think it's very different.
No, I think this is very close to the challenge list. They're on 24 lands with the 3 trolls. They have 2 Thirst, 2 Cling. The only difference is they cut the 2 Damnations for a Night's Whisper and a Sheoldred's Edict, but everything else is different. Or everything else is the same, excuse me.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a couple other people playing this to result as well. Just worth mentioning that it's not just how awesome Devon is at playing Magic that's making the deck good. There are other people doing it too.
Deck's busted.
Yeah, I was going to say, what do you think is the main thing that gives it good matchups right now? I'm going to take a guess, and I think this is just the best One Ring deck, because you kind of mentioned that earlier. But is that the bottom line about what's good about this deck right now? It's the best One Ring deck going.
So that is definitely part of it. But one thing that I really love about this deck, and kind of the classification of it, we were joking about it earlier, whether we want to call it a control deck or a mid-range deck, but the reality is it's both. It's everything. You have the ability to play these kind of, early interactive games where you're pushing and Thoughtseizing and all this stuff. If you look at the amount of 1 mana spells you have 4 Push, 4 Thoughtseize, 2 Cling, 2 Thirst, and 3 Troll. You have a million things to do on turn 1, and subsequently you have a million things to do on turn 2, because you can double spell on turn 2. And there's not many 4 Karn, 4 One Ring decks that get to say they can double spell on turn 2. And I think just that pure efficiency of all these cards, and to be completely honest with you, when you're going off with Ring and drawing all these cards, it doesn't really matter what spells you're casting in the first couple of turns, as long as you're doing anything meaningful and interacting in any sort of meaningful way. Once you resolve the ring, the game is over. You know what I mean? And it's that's the truth with this deck. And just anything that trades for any piece of cardboard in the early turns, really good with the ring. And I think that's what I love so much about it. And the one other thing that I will mention, if you're listening to this podcast and you have Blood Moon on your sideboard, do not bring it against Cabal Coffers. Because the amount of times, I actually think that people who board in Blood Moon make my win percentage better. Like the scam players who brought in Blood Moon against me, because what happens is post board, we can talk about the sideboard in a second, but post board, they kind of like mulligan to a fast Blood Moon because they think that it just shuts you out. They cast Blood Moon and you cast the One Ring, and then their deck just doesn't do anything.
Right.
Because you have, like, you're a deck that has 8 swamps and 3 trolls. You're not going to get mana screwed off black.
Right.
So, don't bring in Blood Moon.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other, of course, broadly speaking, that's the other thing that's good about those 1 mana cyclers is that they're good against One Ring. But that is very interesting. I do think a lot of people would try Blood Mooning you, and yeah, it doesn't do much.
Well, okay, I should say, I think if your deck is aggressive, if you're trying to use Blood Moon to kind of shut the door, as it were, if you're putting a lot of pressure on, then I think it's fine. But the issue is, we talk about the sideboard. There's 4 Leyline of the Voids in my sideboard, and we'll talk about that. That's kind of what my plan is against scam, is to bring in Leyline to not get fast scammed. And as long as I'm not getting fast scammed, my, even my mid to late game is just going to be so much better than theirs because I have Ring and they don't. But yeah, that's kind of, we can move into the sideboard here. It's relatively self-explanatory, the wish board targets. So the sideboard right now is 11 wish targets and 4 Leylines. Very simple sideboard. You don't do a lot of sideboarding. But as far as the wish targets are concerned, the challenge, I played a Nihil Spellbomb, and I did not register a Walking Ballista. That was an error. You should play a Walking Ballista in your card deck. That was on accident. So, I guess we did it on hard mode, right? With the challenge on hard mode.
Right. Yeah, there's no kill in the sideboard.
And it was kind of funny all day because chat kept asking me, like, hey, why aren't you just getting a Walking Ballista? When my opponent was at like 2 life and I had a Karn, and I just stared at them, it was really funny.
Yeah. Like, so I have a Bomat Courier I can attack with. I'll get that instead.
Yeah, that was the swap from the challenge list.
Yeah.
And then, that's really the only difference there. A lot of people ask me why no Pithing Needle. I don't actually think it's good against your bad matchups. Like, I think you're favored against Yawgmoth anyways, so I don't think you really need it. And Wrenn and 6, like, you just don't care about those cards against 4 color. You just Karn ring them out of the game. And then Leyline. We'll just talk about this very briefly because this card is very important against, one of the most important decks in the format, Scam. One thing that I will mention, not just Leyline of the Void, but just both Leylines, Void and Sanctity, both incredible against Scam. I think Void's slightly better because it shuts off Kroxa. But the way that you need to interact with Scam is you have to assume that when you're on the draw, you need something to interact with them. And this is one of the only things that can do that. And it stops the top percentage of their draws. And as long as you're stopping the top percentage of their draws, you should be able to assume that your mid game can kind of outgrind theirs. And that's why I like the Leylines in that matchup.
Yeah. Your mid game is so much more efficient than Red Black's mid game, because we rely so hard on the scam part. And if you don't have it, you don't have it. What, I guess, to close this out, so it sounds like you're kind of in on this deck. You're going to keep playing this deck, like for the little bit. What do you think would have to change in the meta to make you reconsider this being the deck that you feel like is where you want to be for the moment in Modern?
So as far as, from my experience, I think the tougher matchups are kind of the ones that are heavier counterspell decks. So control decks are not the best because they're, littered with counterspells. Like, I got destroyed by blue-black a couple of times, the blue-black ring deck. So I think that matchup is not great. And Living End surprisingly felt like a bad matchup just because, like, the only thing that you really have against them is Leyline. Living End is notoriously good against Thoughtseize because all of their cards cycle. So if you Thoughtseize them and you take their Cascade spell and their hand is 4 cyclers, they're just going to find another one. Like, Thoughtseize is not good against Living End. So if they have an answer for your Leyline, you basically just lose because your clock is too slow. So those matchups were tough. And, if those pick up in popularity, I could maybe see it. Maybe you could also adjust the flex spots accordingly. But yeah, up until then, I don't know. This deck just other than that, it doesn't really feel like it has any bad matchups.
No bad matchups. You heard it here. Mono-Black Coffers.
Love it. I'm definitely not checking how much I need to spend to purchase the rest of the cards in this deck.
Oh my gosh.
Don't remind me.
It's not a small amount.
Oh, I forgot how much Beseech the Mirror is right now.
I looked at Urborg the other day and I'm off it.
That card is so expensive. I bought one for Red Black in Pioneer
Same.
And I was like, oh, I don't want to pay $35 for this card, but I guess I will. But now you need 4 of them, Devon, for Mono-Black Coffers.
I'm somehow holding 3, and one of them is Korean. I don't know how I got that. I think actually I opened that in referenced last week. Scott K he just purchased me like a whatever M15 or something that was in like Korean pack, and there's a Urbark in it.
I actually think I got you those packs. Was it Scott?
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it.
All right, one of us. Anyway, let's talk about some other stuff in Modern.
Yes, please.
Because there is some other hype cards from WoE in Modern. Now, I didn't get a chance to play these because I spent a little time in Pioneer this week, but then kind of things went Twitter wild like they always do on the weekend, on the release weekend. I think we have 2 things to really talk about in Modern that are worth a little bit of discussion.
Yes.
Love to hear Devon's experience playing against them or kind of seeing where it went. But first card we got to talk about is the card that I think is going up against Beseech the Mirror as the most expensive card in the set suddenly, by the way. And that's Agatha's Soul Cauldron.
And I will say, we called that this card was either going to be not much or potentially extremely powerful. And I think it might be on the latter half of things in terms of at least application in the format.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of our preview episode, we both were kind of like, well, what do we think is going to be the most impactful card in the set? And we were like, well, the most played one is probably going to be Not Dead after all.
Yeah.
But the most impactful card is probably going to be Agatha's Soul Cauldron. And turns out I think it might be.
Yeah.
Although there's a little asterisk on that for after this.
Yeah, this is the one I'm kicking myself because I was like, this is going to be a very expensive mythic. And yet I just was not enough of like, I don't want to do the finance thing. Like, I don't think I'm going to play this card. I'm not going to buy it just for the profits. And I still kind of wish I had. So yeah, I'll take a load off you here, Dave. I'll just read this card. Agatha Soul Cauldron, 2 mana legendary artifact. You may spend mana. This is flavor text. You may spend mana as though were any mana of any color to activate abilities of creatures you control. Then creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them have all activated abilities of all creature cards exiled with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. You can tap it to exile target card from a graveyard. When a creature card is exiled this way, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. So you see where this is going. Stuff.
Yeah.
It's a lot of places that it's going. Turns out it's a lot of places that it's going.
There's a lot of creatures with activated abilities. Who knew?
I got destroyed by this card in the Super Qualifier yesterday. You know who I lost to?
Claudio?
Zerk.
Oh, Zerk.
Who you mentioned in the notes.
Yeah, Zerk.
Because I actually added Zerk on, I guess we'll call it X or Twitter, whatever, who cares. But I added him on Twitter, and I was like, the Yogg matchup is good unless you're playing against exactly Zerk. And he played circles around me. He's an unbelievable player.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's start there for a minute because we all thought this card was gonna show up. Turns out that Claudio, well-known Magic Online player as well, Claudio won this Modern Super Qualifier over the weekend with Yogg with 3 cauldrons in it, and Zerk was also on the same list as you mentioned. I think Zerk came in 15th or something like that.
I thought Claudio won the challenge.
Oh, am I wrong that Claudio won the challenge and not the showcase? I'm sorry. No, you're right. Claudio won the challenge. Zerk was in the showcase qualifier. The qualifier was won by a different deck that we'll talk about in a minute, which has also some new cards in it. But anyway, Claudio won the challenge, and it's Yogg with Cauldron, and it's kind of like what we thought would happen. So Claudio beat Creativity, Burn, Yawgmoth, 4-color Coffers in the Swiss, and then in the top 8 beat Grixis Control, Twiddlestorm, and Escape Shift.
Interesting lineup, huh?
Interesting bracket there. And there's a sideboard guide forthcoming from Claudio. I think that given that good players like Zerk, good Yogg players like Zerk, and Claudio is, also a well-known player, picking up Cauldron like this, it seems like a lot of people are taking notice. But it's been in a lot other decks from there. I mean, one thing that's interesting is that a bunch of people in our Discord are super excited about playing the Cauldron in Heliod as well. And we had 2 players in the Dive Down Nation get 5-0s in the last 24 hours with Abzan Heliod. Yeah, Turtle Power was one. Mickey S., longtime friend of everybody on this podcast right now. And then also Spencer from our Discord as well today got a 5-0 with Abzan Heliod as well, which sort of like a green-white Heliod Scurry Oak Rosy list with 3 Grist and 3 Cauldron and a couple of Thoughtseize in the sideboard. And that's kind of what it is, and so that's doing it. And then Spike has also picked up Soul Cauldron and has started playing it in Hardened Scales as well. And there were 3 players in the Super Qualifier with Cauldron in their Hardened Scales deck. 2 of them made top 32.
It's a lot of it.
It's a lot of it.
One thing that Cauldron goes crazy with Walking Ballista. When I played against Zerk, he had Ballista, and there was a turn where he just went exiled the Ballista with the Cauldron, untap, sack a bunch of stuff to Yawgmoth, and just like, God, it goes so crazy with it. Card's great. I think it's nuts.
Yeah, it's just so flexible. Like there's just so much stuff you can do with it, and I think that I don't think we're just scratching the surface, but I think we're on level 1, and people are going to keep developing these decks to be more and more interesting, more and more streamlined and perfected. And I don't know if these are like new tier 1 scourges of the format, but I think they're definitely a really important addition to Creature Combo, which is a deck style that hasn't been really killing it lately.
Yeah, is this finally the card that like helps Creature Combo come back? There's every set, there's like a card that's going to help Collected Company be a thing that we have to care about. But Yawgmoth's already good, so it's already like the good Creature Combo deck. But everybody's always like, oh, it's going to be the sword, Elspeth's Sword from New Capenna is going to do the thing, and then something else is going to do the thing. Like, what is this card doing that is really helping those decks come back? Mickey, when I was talking to him, mentioned that the way that he thinks about Soul Cauldron is that it's kind of like a 2-mana reanimate for the payoff cards, plus whatever incremental value you get off of occasionally milling cards into your graveyard off of Grist, where you occasionally hit something you really care about, and that goes in the graveyard too. Is that just what it is? It's just resilient against removal, and that's just helping plug a big hole in these decks, or what do you think?
Yeah, so Grist is by far the main reason that you're playing this, because for those of you who don't know, you can exile the Grist from your graveyard because it is a creature when it's in the graveyard. So you get a counter on a creature you control, and that creature has the ability of Grist, which means you can start making tokens. And that's kind of basically what it is. It's like Grist is the best card, like one of the best cards in the Yawgmoth deck. And every single time a Grist is played, your opponent has to answer it on the spot. And with Cauldron, even if they answer it, you're just going to make another Grist. Like every single time, you're just going to keep churning out Grist. And that like endless stream of value is just so hard for the fair decks to keep up with. Also, it's just randomly graveyard hate because it eats any graveyard. So if your opponent tries to scam their Grief or their Fury, nope, no thanks.
Yeah, it's just like a really good unlicensed Hearse.
Right.
A really
even
good
better
Hearse.
Hearse. Yeah. Yeah. And this card spiked up to be $40 over the weekend. Like I said, I haven't got a chance to play it, but I think it's pretty clear after this weekend that like this card is going to be here for a minute at least, and we'll see how it gets optimized from here.
Yeah, it just like you said, it just adds this other entire dimension to the Yawgmoth deck that it didn't necessarily have before. It didn't really have a way to recur Grist, and that's just that can't be matched.
Yeah. And then the other card I wanted to talk about was Up the Beanstalk. Up this Beanstalk, which we talked about on everybody kind of knew that this card was going to make an impact, I think, as well. The thing that is really surprising me about this is kind of the precise way in which it's being used, and which I'll be curious to know what Devon and Shane think about this. So, Beanstalk was in 4-color elemental builds. It's in your 4-color Omnath builds. It was very much like the Twitter meme of the weekend because everybody just loves to say beans. We love saying beans. Devon just dropped a huge plate of baked beans into our notes document, looking at baked beans right now.
Stanislav's like, breakfast is served.
Oh, yeah. UK breakfast. I actually don't like baked beans for what it's worth. Not a fan, which is weird maybe. But okay, so the deck that won the Super Qualifier, I misattributed to Claudio a minute ago, was actually a 4-color Omnath deck by Dan Zant. Now, this deck, this is a 75 card main Omnath deck, which I would love to hear what you think about that really quickly as well, Devon. In an era where we don't have Yorion anymore, we're still playing 75 cards sometimes. I don't know.
Yeah, more than 60 cards. I feel like I've seen that before.
Yeah, exactly. So, but here's the thing that was wild is that this is a deck that had 4 Up the Beanstalks, and it also has for rings. Now, when I originally saw people talking about this on Twitter, I kind of thought that they were going to take a shot on taking ring out and just straight up replacing Beanstalk with ring, but that didn't make any sense to me. And then when I saw this still, though, I'm like, we're just drawing cards. Like in Modern, we're just drawing cards now. That's all that we care about. And it's sort of like we just want to draw more and more cards because that's kind of what Coffers does too, right?
Dave, are you saying that you don't want to draw cards?
I think that longtime listeners know that it's one of my favorite things to do in Magic. But I do it with bad cards like Sleight of Hand in Pioneer and things like that. But
doesn't technically draw a card.
True. That's true. But yeah, I was a little surprised by the fact that we were just all in on 4 each of these. Is that a surprise to you, Devon, or no?
So kind of, I think when I sketched out a list, I was just like, screw it. I'm going to play 4 rings and 4 Beanstalk. I think maybe I might've had 3 rings. I can't remember, but I only had 60 cards and I haven't gotten around to play with Beanstalk yet, but I can imagine if you're playing with 60 cards and you're playing a long game and you have 4 rings and 4 Beanstalks that, you could just deck yourself.
Yeah.
Because the thing about Beanstalk is it's not a may, it's a must.
Right.
So if you go a little bit too deep and have 2 Beanstalks in play. But I think it is good to be playing both Beanstalk and Ring because they occupy different spots in the curve. Like Beanstalk is a way to give you a 2 mana play, which you don't have a ton of, especially because a lot of these 60 card versions are cutting Halfling. So you even have less 2 mana plays because you don't have Halfling and its Fairy anymore. You only really have Wrenn and 6. So if you look at some of the other 4 color lists, maybe like one like Doom Switches, which we'll get to in a second, that my cousin, no Halflings. So the more 2 mana play is good. And I think if you decided that you want to play 4 of each, then 75 cards makes sense.
I was just about to mention Doom Switches. I did not grok that he pulled out the Halfling. So that's good to know. Yeah.
Yeah, because he had Kahira.
Oh, right. He does have Kahira. I mean, I saw Danzant talking on Twitter a little bit and mentioned that part of the reason that they like Beanstalk so much is because of what you said, extra 2 mana plays. They felt confident keeping 2 land hands more often because this list that Danzant had, by the way, it was 75 cards with 26 lands.
Which is kind of low.
I mean, right? It feels low to me, but I've never won a super qualifier. So maybe I'm the one that's wrong, but it did feel a little low to me.
Think about it this way, right? If you're adding 15 cards and only 3 of them are lands, because most lists play 23 lands, that ratio is kind of off. Right. But if you've decided that you're keeping every 2 land hand with the Beanstalk, which I think you should be, then it kind of justifies that lower land count.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the other thing that surprised me a little bit about this is kind of the flip side of this, which is that there's only 14 cards in these lists that trigger Beanstalk. There's 11 in the Doom Switch list that trigger it, and it doesn't count sideboard cards like Obsidian Charmaw or something like that. Like those we'll think about later. But I was also kind of surprised that it was that low, like that they hadn't pushed some of their curve higher up somehow to be able to do even more. But maybe there's just nowhere else to go with it. Honestly, like there aren't any more cards that they can cheat into play. I did see that one player, Bullwinkle 6705, had 2 time warps as well on their list, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Whoa.
I think Bullwinkle had 3. I was going to play that list on stream today, but I just didn't have enough time.
Yeah. So
I play it tomorrow.
So what do you think about this particular version of Omnath having just an absurd amount of card draw, like literally being able to draw your whole deck?
I mean, it makes sense, right? Like you're playing, it kind of plays into the Ring. Like the reason the Ring is so good is because you have a bunch of pitch spells, so you have extra stuff to do with those extra cards. And it the Beanstalk sort of provides a similar role where, especially if you have 2 going, you're like, pitch spell, draw 2 cards, that can get you another pitch spell or material to use another pitch spell. And it's kind of the same thing where it's just like, you just keep everything going and keep cycling through all this stuff until you eventually find your win condition. And, you're just going to bury your opponent in cards because even though you're going you're going down a card in the pitch exchange, you're getting that card back from the Beanstalk. So I think it does make a lot of sense that if I was playing 4 color, I'd probably play 4 of each.
Yeah, interesting. And maybe the reason the Danzant list is 75 cards ultimately is really just not to deck themselves. Like knowing that they're going to draw so many cards and just saying, hey, I'm going to have more than the other people that are drawing. And it just is what it is. I feel good about low land openers, and so I can add those to my range of things that I can keep. And then, boom, I can draw as much as I want to. I don't have to worry about running out of cards.
Like, you can imagine playing a 4-color mirror where if you have 4 Beanstalk and 4 Ring, and they only have 4 Ring, and you both have 60 cards, you're like almost 100% going to deck out, because those games always go to time
Right.
anyways, and you're always going to be down cards.
Yeah. So that's what I have for Modern for now. Shane, thoughts on Beanstalk?
Man, can this card possibly be really good enough to like actually carry a deck more? I don't know. Like this reads like an experimental card rather than like an actually good card, but drawing cards is good. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just the fact that when it replaces itself is like enough. I don't really know.
It's the ETB for sure. If this card didn't ETB draw, I think it would be unplayable.
Yeah, it wouldn't
like
be good.
Nightmarish.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's a 2-mana cycler that then sets up future plays, and I get it, but in today's economy, in today's Modern, this is a grind card, right? So like this is very specific builds like we've been talking about. So I'm curious to see where this goes. It's not my kind of card.
The way that it feels like to me, it's like 2-mana draw. Like if you call it 2-mana draw 3, but you can have those draws in certain like increments. Because like the fact that you can just go turn 2, play it, and fury your board while drawing a card, like you're getting those cards no matter what, but they're different installment periods, if that makes sense.
Do we think, and just to close out the discussion, we'd have to be specific about this. Do we think that any of the developments in these 3 decks or any decks in general are going to lead to significant churn in the Modern metagame? Like, are any of these developments going to knock Scam off of being the top meta deck? Do we think? You can just say yes or no.
No.
Shane?
Until I add main deck Leyline to my coffers.
There you go.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is just Grief just does the Grief stuff, and you just can strip out important cards from people's hands, and it happens a lot. And there's just a lot of tools in the Scam toolbox. And the real thing is I don't want to get super in the weeds on it, but I mean, like many people have talked about, and we've talked about in the past, is that it just has a lot of different ways of attacking the opponent. And so like even with the ley lines, that does hopefully clear out some of their plays, but they still have aggressive plays, they have hand interaction, they have the ability to recover from those early stumbles, like early inability to do the evoking stuff. So I don't know, there's not a lot of great ways to really kick that deck pretty hard, but I don't know.
Yeah, I also think
we'll see.
I also think no, but that I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that these can all be viable and Scam still be around, and that's okay for now. All right, let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and talk about Pio in just a moment. Stanislav.
David.
How's it going?
I'm doing okay.
Nice. It's a great Wednesday. We're making it through.
Yeah, I figured I want to be here to talk to you about shaving.
Yeah, if not for the rest of the episode where we talk about new cards from Wilds of Eldraine, you'd like to be here for shaving.
I don't care about any of that stuff.
That's
Give me
true.
old cards.
Give me old cards and new razor blades, am I right?
Dave, can I ask you a question?
Of course.
Do you know how much it costs to buy a 4-pack of Gillette random blade refills? 4 Gillette blade refills. Do you know how much that costs?
I bet it costs $12.
I'm seeing 18 at
Ooh.
Target.
Wow.
Now, follow-up question. Do you know how much it costs to buy 5 razor blades from Barrister and Man to put into your safety razor?
$1 slim dollar.
Less than that.
Wow.
99 cents, baby.
Wow. Off by a razor's edge.
That's the thing that I think people aren't talking about enough with wet shaving and using safety razors in particular. It's so much cheaper. And not only that, if you get a really nice safety razor made out of like stainless steel or titanium or whatever other precious metal is important to you, that thing can just last literally forever until you're a grandma or grandpa using your same old 40-year-old safety razor on different parts of your body.
Now, our friends at Barrister and Man, don't really stock too many razor blade handles themselves, but they do stock the blades.
They do stock the blades, but they stock the other most important bit.
That's right. They stock the stuff that you get to enjoy while you're using the razor blades. Things like shaving soap, things like aftershave, things like beard oil, as we've talked about many times in the past, and all of those things right now available at Barrister and Man. A number of products still on sale, 25% off. Go check that out if you go to barristerandman.com to see what they're up to. But I encourage you, Stan encourages you, we all encourage you, as you think about your beard grooming game for fall, to think about switching to a safety razor and trying out Barrister and Man's excellent shaving products.
In this fall, try their Cheshire shaving soap that goes along perfectly with their Cheshire aftershave splash. It's got a picture of Big Ben on the label.
We know how that you live very close to Big Ben, Mal, so I know that's kind of your personal symbol.
I've always said it's everyone's favorite clock.
Yeah, it's up there. It's on the list. And if you'd like to try out barristerandman.com, you can use code TheDiveDown23 for 15% off your first order. That's TheDiveDown23 for 15% off your first order. Please check them out.
All right, we are back. And look, we talked a lot about Modern. We talked a lot about good decks and some interesting cards and options in Modern. So let's talk about Modern's slightly unappreciated little sibling in Pioneer. But there's a lot of stuff going on in Pioneer. Devon shared a number of decks that he had been testing with us. I tested out a deck that had been, I think it did a 5-0 in a league, and there's a lot to talk about in Pioneer, especially with some of the cards typically able to make a bigger impact in a smaller format. And so I think there's some cool stuff for us to discuss. And to give Devon a break, I'm going to first talk about a deck that I played. We've talked about it a bit before on here, and that's Boros Convoke. Importantly, this is now featuring the Bunnicorn. And, Doom's back on. I think it makes total sense that we be revisiting Boros Convoke once again, and it's really for only one reason, and that's Regal Bunnicorn, a new and potentially interesting card from Wilds of Eldraine, which is just a 1 and a white rabbit unicorn. That's all you really need, but there's more. Its power and toughness are each equal to the number of non-land permanents you control. So it's just a star creature. Every non-land permanent contributes to its power and toughness, including itself. So in an if a completely empty board besides your lands, it's a 1/1. Not very good. If you have a bunch of other stuff, it gets a lot better. And we talked about Bunnicorn in the spoiler episode. We mentioned it in this deck with potential application in Convoke, because what the deck does is make a bunch of permanents as you are progressing your game plan along. And so Bunnicorn in this deck is kind of your Pioneer Tarmogoyf. It gets pretty huge pretty quickly. Like, it's really not uncommon to play this thing as like a 4/4 or like a 6/6 pretty darn early, and then you're presenting a quick clock, barring a number of other things that we'll talk about. And so what this is replacing is some number of like Clarion Spirits, Regal Leosaur, or a few other random cards that have shown up in the deck. Doom, where else have kind of you seen, what else have you seen people be cutting for this, or what would you cut for this in kind of the older build of the deck?
So yeah, you are correct. The flex spots being the Clarion Spirits and or Forbidden Friendships. Mm-hmm. So the Burning Tree Emissary versions played Forbidden Friendship, and the thing is, you can't really play Burning Tree when you have Bunny, because it's a 2-drop that you can't cast up Burning Tree.
Yeah.
So when you're playing with the Bunnicorn, you kind of have to use that as the other 2-drop you want to play is the Reinforcements, the 1/1 flash that makes another creature. And that's really where I've seen cutting cards. Sometimes the other 1-drops too, like Giant Killer and stuff like that.
Sure.
One thing I did want to bring up that kind of a good point here is it kind of gives the deck a different dimension. Yeah. Where this deck is incredibly good at going wide, but sometimes you get brickwalled by like an Old Troll or a Cavalier of Thorns very easily, because not even your other tall creatures, your 4/4s, don't attack well into those. And now you just have an 8/8 or a 10/10 later in the game against green You do have to pair it with some ways to give trample, which we can talk about. But if you can do that, that's a way to steal a game against green.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's something that I noticed when I was playing. I played maybe like 7 or 8 matches with this deck because the matches go so fast. It's a really nice testing deck, or if you want to blow through a league pretty quickly. I did have a few grinders that were actually pretty satisfying games that I can maybe remember enough to talk about. But yeah, I think that's the really important thing is like frequently I'd be in a position where it's like, look, I've got 7 creatures on board, but I can only really swing with Bunnicorn because they have to block it. And so you're just sort of if you have enough turns, you can just keep attacking in. They're forced to block. Their board sort of dwindles as yours maintains its size or gets bigger because of the things that your deck is just trying to do. And then once you sort of chip away at their biggest blockers, or you chip away at their board, you leave them with pretty much nothing left, and you can just do alpha strikes. And there's a couple other things that then support your alpha strikes, like you hold the goblin thing, the what is that thing called? The
Bushwhacker?
Bushwhacker. Yeah, the Bushwhacker.
Reckless.
Thing with Surge. And, it gives your whole board a little pump and stuff like that. It gives haste to whatever else you play along with it. So, yeah, I think the strengths of Bunnicorn is just that in this deck, it comes down and is usually at least like a Watch Wolf, right? Like it's like your 2 mana 3/3. And then what happens then after is like it really quickly scales. So like, turn 3, you can cast a Gleeful Demolition or something like that on a blood token or a clue token. You make those extra 2 permanents on top of blowing up the outer effect, of course. You cast maybe another 1 mana creature or something like that. Then you're attacking for 6. On turn 3 with just 1 creature if you're not swinging with something else. So like I would be, often be able to hold like the Resolute Reinforcements, which is like that 1 and a white flash creature that makes 2 pieces of cardboard. And, they declare blocks, then you can surprise them with an extra 2 power and toughness, or you're just adding more damage on an empty board or something like that. So, you think about Clarion Spirit, which was the same casting cost, and all Clarion Spirit really was a 2/2. That helps you keep going wide, which like Devon was getting at is not necessarily the biggest need in this deck, right? And so Bunnicorn pivots you to having something that's like, must block or must remove. And Clarion Spirit didn't really offer that, at least as quickly.
One thing about comparing it to Clarion Spirit, and I think a lot of people maybe don't realize, is on turn 2, it's a 3/3 if you have an Epicure or an Inspector. So if you're on the draw against Rakdos and they hold up Stomp, they can't stomp your Bunny on turn 2. Whereas normally they could stomp your Clarion Spirit. So, that's something to keep in mind for the listeners at home.
For sure. That gets into some things you need to think about with Bunnicorn too, which is the power and toughness dynamically changes.
Yes.
So if you're like a Death Shadow player, you're probably used to this kind of stuff. But like with, I definitely misplayed once where I was doing kind of an alpha strike. It was basically to set up a future alpha strike where I was sort of swinging in to clear their board with a bunch of stuff. And I was like, well, my Bunnicorn's going to survive. And, they took care of a couple of my 1/1s with their like 1 toughness blockers. And then I was like, oh, wait, I forgot that my Bunnicorn is going to shrink when I lose these tokens.
Yeah.
So it took lethal damage eventually after losing the tokens. What was really funny is I could have flashed in the reinforcements card, but I kind of didn't think about it at the time because I was new and playing quickly on Magic Online with this deck. So, live and learn. It didn't cost me the game or anything like that, but that's the kind of stuff you have to be thinking about because this deck involves so many small creatures and so many small pieces of cardboard, and also the ability to, sometimes like, Gleeful Demolition's a sorcery. You can't cast it during combat. So do I want to do this before combat? Is that going to change anything where I'll need to do it now? And I would rather have done it now than I would later. Like, do they have damage-based interaction that if they block, and if they block in a certain configuration of things, that they can also then just burn my Bunnicorn after the fact and then kill it? So those are the things that pays you to pay attention to.
Another thing to keep in mind is sequencing, which has always kind of been the more difficult aspect to this deck. It's like which stuff do you want to play early versus which stuff do I want to save until the Bushwhacker turn? Because like if they don't know that you have a bunny that's going to get haste, so you can just like deploy something else on turn 2 and then wait for the bunny plus Bushwhacker, which by the way, that combination of cards on turn 4 is really sick.
That sounds amazing. Bunny plus
yeah.
That's hilarious.
That comes up a lot.
How much do you think you're attacking for on turn 4 if you go? I mean, like, what can you get to if you go bunny Bushwhacker? Kind of.
Like $1 million.
Like $1 million. Easy.
Something like
Easy.
that.
You got it.
I think I killed 2 people on turn 3 when I played the deck.
It can happen. You can get like almost lethal. You can get effective lethal. What I found myself doing a lot was if I felt that like I could deploy Bunnicorn on turn 2 so that it wouldn't die, then I'm really happy, especially against like a control deck. I mean, unless it's like sort of if they have a black base removal, then you're not super happy. But it's the kind of thing where it's like, yeah, if I untap with this thing, then I'm able to swing for a lot because I can make, maybe 4 or 5 pieces of cardboard that just are adding to the strength of this thing. But like you said, I think it also pays to think about, do I want to save this for my late game surprise alpha strike where I have this gigantic beater that they kind of have to think about. But of course, one of the issues with, and this gets to maybe some weaknesses of Bunnicorn, that just doesn't have anything. There's no other keywords. Right? There's no trample. There's no evasion at all. There's no menace. So like chump blockers are just stopping this thing in its tracks. That, of course, potentially gives you the opportunity to get all your other tokens in. So if those are beefed up with the 1/1 counters from your Loxodon or their +1 power from your Bushwhacker, then maybe that's just as good. But that was one issue where Bunnicorn, I think, had a little bit of an issue. But I know that you mentioned here in the notes, like there are some options for increasing Bunnicorn's ability to trample over stuff.
So the most recent list that I played had 2 Embercleave and 2 Legion Loyalist. Legion Loyalist is a card that people have played in the past, not necessarily for the trample, because, before Bunnicorn, you really just had a bunch of 1/1s and 2/2s. But mostly for like the token can't block aspect of it against Greasefang. But Legion Loyalists, people don't realize some of the flavor text that actually does give trample. And the fact that all of your stuff gets trample on attacks, similar with Embercleave, where you just send in a big attack and then, all of a sudden you have a 10/10 double strike trample. So those are 2 things to consider with the bunny. And, Embercleave is basically always 2 mana in your deck that has 1 million 1-drops.
Yeah, that makes good sense. I like the Embercleave quite a bit there. I mean, the problem is that Embercleave really only pairs well with your Convoke creatures and Bunnicorn, but honestly, even on the Convoke creatures, which I think both have 4 power, that's not bad. Like you're fine with a Embercleave on those folks. But yeah, I think that's a good idea to test that. I wouldn't mind that at all. One of the other weaknesses I think of Bunnicorn is that it doesn't make 2 pieces of cardboard or more. So like it's not really on your primary game plan. It is only a support piece. Like the floor is very low. And that's not great. Like it's not, I don't think it doesn't make the decks, and you could maybe correct me on this because I think it does get through maybe some larger creatures better than other parts of the deck did before. And so maybe it does strengthen particular matchups in that fashion. But I think some of those decks also often feature removal. So like, if you're playing against Rakdos midrange or something like that, it's not like Bunnicorn is going to have any better chance of surviving through like a Fatal Push or other piece of black base removal. So, but you do want to be able to attack through even their 3/2 Vampire or the Bone Crusher Giant or something like that with a larger Bunnicorn. So
yeah,
there's strikes and gutters here.
Yeah, so I think it kind of helps your Lotus Field matchup because it gives you a way to get like this, thing on turn 2 that you're almost 100% to be able to kill them on turn 3 if you have any sort of like Bushwhacker follow-up. But I don't know if you really needed the help against Lotus Field. I think it was already a favorable matchup because they don't have any interaction and you're goldfishing on turn 3 against them. And the reason this deck is so good, at least I thought this deck had a decent Rakdos matchup. And part of that is because none of your cards trade effectively with Fatal Push. It's kind of like the same thing with Burn, where the reason burn is so good is because you can't trade a removal spell with a lava spike. And it kind of is the same dichotomy or the same thing with Rakdos versus Convoke. It's like, if I play a 3-bit Inspector and you Fatal Push it, I still have a thing in play. Your Fatal Push didn't do that much. So I think Bunnicorn definitely does, weaken your Rakdos matchup.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know exactly how it fits into the deck in terms of its performance. I think it makes very good sense in the deck. I routinely liked having it, but I don't have enough experience with this in previous matchups and previous builds to be like, oh yeah, Bunnicorn's really changing the way I'm winning games. It's really changing my matchups and things like that. So, I mean, really, I just want to talk about this card. I want to talk about how it felt. And I think getting some ways to give this thing some evasion, give it some trample, make a really good sense. I think overall, this isn't a dive into this, but this deck's fun, good, and cheap. It's a fun thing to play on Magic Online for 50 ticks or something like that. It's pretty dirt cheap. And I think there's a lot of people who want to play control in Pioneer, and this deck thwomps control. Even if you play bad, like I did, even if you play into Hidetsugu consumes all, or a 4-mana sweeper or something like that, if you play moderately intelligently, you're rebuilding extremely quickly, and then just going ham yet again. You basically have to make your opponent have to have 2 sweepers to have a chance. And yep. I think the deck has strengths and weaknesses. Blockers can be a pain, but that's one reason that Bunnicorn's pretty good. Sweepers are a pain, but I think the deck is cool. I would play it again. It's the type of thing where it's just if I wanted to play Magic for 10 minutes, just go play a match of this. Just you're good. You know what I mean?
5 minutes.
Yeah, sometimes that. I mean, I did have some fun. I did have a fun grindy creature deck matchup. My opponent was doing something off the wall, and they had a number of fairly minimal creatures, and I had a number of fairly minimal creatures, obviously. But if that's all they're doing is sort of continuing to build up a board, you can outclass them or surprise them. I played the sideboard card that that's a 3-drop that gives all of your creatures menace, which is specifically designed for matchups like this. So just hold, go. You know what I mean? And then just take over. Giant Killer does come in clutch with stuff like that, when you can play it as a removal spell, remove their biggest blocker, and then you're able to attack through with stuff. So, it's fun. I wish it had a little bit different type of reach, but that's a conversation for another day. Overall, cool deck, pretty cool card. It's definitely pretty vanilla, but I think there's some application for Bunnicorn now and hopefully in the future.
Yeah, one last thing I'll say about the matchups. I do think it improves your green matchup, asterisk, if you can have a way to give it trample. Because, part of the matchup before was they would just put a bunch of stuff on the field, and it was really hard to crack through. But if you have, a 10-10 or 11-11 double strike trample, they probably can't survive that. So if you playing Embercleave plus Bunny, I think that can make the green matchup better.
I'm all for it. David.
I'm still here.
You also played Pioneer.
I did play Pioneer. So of the list of decks that Devon shared with us, and of course of the conversations that we had last week, somebody had to try Elusive Otter. We knew it was going to be me. So I tried out Elusive Otter and Pioneer, and blue, red, Prowess, and Pioneer, of course.
One quick thing before we continue. I wanted to play that card on Wednesday, but it was still bugged. So I don't know when you played it, but apparently maybe it wasn't bugged when you played it.
It definitely worked when I played it, for what it's worth. Yeah. Now, how much did it work? We'll talk about that a little bit right now. But
worked.
Yeah, exactly. It functioned. It functioned. But here's the thing that was interesting. So I'm playing a blue-red Prowess deck that Welcome to the Internet, which is a wonderful Magic Online Magic Online user, Welcome to the Internet, 5-0'd with this on the 7th of September. And so they 5-0'd before this bug with Elusive Otter was working, where the adventure side was just not doing anything. Maybe it was just providing a spell trigger and not putting tokens. I'm not sure exactly what's going on. When I played it, it was fully functioning. But there are 4 Wilds of Eldraine cards in this deck, which I thought was pretty interesting. And I have two of them I can talk about extremely quickly, and then we'll talk a little bit more about some of the other ones. The first one is Elusive Otter, Grows Bounty, which we talked about. The creature side of it is that it is a 1/1 with Prowess that says creatures with power less than Elusive Otter's power can't block it, and it costs a single blue. The Grove's Bounty side, or the spell side, is a sorcery that is X green, distribute X +1/+1 counters among any number of target creatures you control. So that's like the key to this whole thing. But there were 3 other cards in this deck that were new from Wilds of Eldraine, and that is Witch's Mark, Monstrous Rage, and Sleight of Hand.
Did we talk about Witch's Mark? I feel like we talked about Monstrous Rage.
We did talk about Monstrous
Rage.
That's like that cool trick. Yeah. So Witch's Mark is a discard a card. It's a single generic and a red for a discard a card. If you do, draw 2 cards, and then you put a Wicked Roll token on your creature. So it puts +1/+1, and when it dies, each opponent loses 1 life. I think this card is bad. I don't think you need it in this deck. I wouldn't play it again for what it's worth.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they were just testing random stuff.
And I agree. And I think this card is not great. I don't really love the idea of like a thrill of possibility in Prowess anyway, and that's kind of what this is. I also think that all of this aside, I think rolls are actually a little better, especially in Pioneer, than we gave them credit for maybe in the spoiler episodes, but this card is not cheap enough to make the roll good, and the Wicked Roll is also bad, which is part of the reason that it doesn't matter that the Wicked Roll goes on your Fury in Modern, for example. It also doesn't matter here because that second piece of text is really not very good. But Monstrous Rage for a single red is an instant, and it gives +2/+0 and gets a monster roll on your token. We talked about this. It gives +1/+1 and trample to your creature permanently. This card is good.
Oh, this should be in Boros Convoke.
Yeah, maybe.
Oh, for the bunny?
Well, I mean, any of your Prowess creatures. Any of the Convoke creatures too. It's not terrible.
Yeah.
Could see it.
But at any rate, I think as far as new cards, so I thought in the spoiler, I thought that this card could be good. I played with this card in Commander this weekend. It was good. I played with it in Pioneer, and it was good. I know Devon is looking at me. My Commander is that bad.
This card in Commander?
That I played this in Commander. Yeah.
What the hell?
Yeah, I'm doing spell slinging and casting sorceries and stuff. Casting Wheel of Fortune at instant speed with trample.
You're throwing fireballs.
No shade.
Yeah, exactly. But this card I think is good. I like this card a lot. I think giving some creature on your team trample forever is really worth it, and doing instant speed is also very handy. Of course, it's a good combat trick. I sideboard it out a lot. It's on the chopping block for when you have to sideboard in this deck and you want to go more interactive with counter spells, but it is what it is.
Just quick note on Monstrous Rage before we move on. I saw 4 copies of this card in 3 different decks. They were all the Boros Heroic deck from the challenges this weekend.
Yes. That is a deck that I have loved at different points in Modern as well, and this seems like a good card for different points in Pioneer as well. This seems like a good card in that deck as well. But the card that was the biggest upgrade for Prowess, all of these, not to give any spoilers away, was Sleight of Hand, in my opinion. And Sleight of Hand, I don't think we need to read a card text, but this was the best addition to the deck. I don't even care that it's a sorcery and not an instant. It's just so much better than Opt, honestly, to be able to dig and get better cards off of it instead of just get spell triggers off of it. Having to commit pre-combat is a downside, but it is what it is. I get to be able to get a better card out of the equation, and honestly, that just made the deck feel a lot better than it did with Opt.
Yeah, and instant versus sorcery, I feel like it doesn't matter that much in your Prowess deck because you're mostly casting stuff on your own turn anyways.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I guess saving Opt is a combat trick, but you could also argue that seeing an extra card pre-combat can find you another spell that you can also pre-combat, and it's it opens up.
Correct. Yeah, and I think the big thing there, you hit on it, is that you want to be able to play some cantrips at instant speed. If someone tries to shock your Monastery Swift Spear when you go in, it's a combat trick. I just think that the ability to recover from bad draws or rebuild better off of this turned out to be better in the long run. And so I would definitely play Sleight of Hand in this deck going forward and not even really hesitate about it for what it's worth. But hey, people didn't want to really hear about those 3 cards, even though Sleight of Hand's the best one. I think it's super boring. I think people want to hear about the Otter, right? Otter. How good was the Otter? Was it good to have 12 1-mana Prowess cards? I think the Otter is very medium, to be honest. It's extremely fragile. It's very nice to have a Prowess creature that's also a spell, but the spell side is super expensive when it really comes down to it. And so I felt like
it's like flavor text.
It's not. It's a little better than flavor text because you can even just cast it for a single green and get no counters and get a prowess trigger,
just for
which
prowess,
occasionally you want to do. But I did win games where I went like turn 5. I have a Swift Spear and a Soulscar Mage out, and I'm gonna put one counter on one of them and 2 counters on the other one and keep up Spell Pierce. Like that's what I'm doing, and that won me at least 1 or 2 games when I was playing. But the problem is I really just think that I would have preferred Sprite Dragon in almost every single time that I had Elusive Otter because of the haste. And I think if people have listened to this show for a while, they know how I feel about Sprite Dragon, which is not very good. And so for me to say that I think Sprite Dragon is better than this card, I don't know, but that might just be one draft go through it. I played 1 league. I got a 2-3 out of it. I don't even remember. I know I beat Racksack and lost to Rakdos mid. And then after that, it's a little hazy, like what particular decks I played. I think I played another Rakdos deck and beat that one as well, weirdly. But it wasn't terrible, and I might do give another league a chance. But I kind of felt like it wasn't enough of an upgrade, and the Otter is so fragile that it was just kind of like it wasn't really doing much to move the needle on prowess for me, generally speaking.
How often did the can't block text come up? Because I played against the Otter a couple of times, and I feel like it was really impressive when I played against it.
I would say infrequently. It came up probably twice in the league that I was playing, where it was either, I play Otter and it gets killed, or where it fits into my curve, I have to play it unprotected, and maybe I just shouldn't do that. Maybe it's just like, don't ever play it on the creature side unless you're going to have mana left over. So either let it sit in the adventure zone or, play it with other open mana. So I don't think it came up very often in that case. I definitely don't remember alphaing anyone with like a giant Otter at any point during the league, unfortunately. Okay. But you thought it was pretty good pressure when you were playing against it?
Yeah, and maybe that was just a product of the decks that I was playing. I think they were mostly white decks that didn't have a ton of instant speed interaction. Like I didn't have fatal pushes or anything like that. So, and I was playing more to the board with creatures, and that's kind of where the Otter shines, is against those decks. The problem is there's not a lot of those in Pioneer. Most of the decks are, equipped to deal with the Otter at instant speed with fatal push or what have you.
Yeah, or Stomp. Stomp is, of course, the big blowout where you're like, okay, we're going to do something, and then they stomp and then play the creature. It is funny. Like the biggest thing I got out of this deck is that Ledger Shredder is still a great card. Like I haven't played a Ledger Shredder in a while because it's not in any of the decks I play in Modern right now. And I was just like, wow, Ledger Shredder is really good. I can get this up to a 4/5 or a 4/6, no problem. Like every game and attack in. So most of the games that I won were really based off of killing with Ledger Shredder plus like a Swift Spear or something like that to keep it ground down.
I will say, speaking of Ledger Shredder, in my leagues with Convoke, I think I played against Ledger Shredder a couple of times, and boy, as a Convoke player, you do not want to see Ledger Shredder on the other side of the battlefield because you are casting 2 spells every turn and you cannot avoid it.
Right. Yeah. And it gets giant and they just get to filter their draws.
Yeah. It's rough.
Yeah. So everyone on this show knows that I love Prowess. I don't think this is enough to make me want to go back to it. Really, I might do it again, but honestly, I would rather play Boros Heroic. Like you said, Devon is like something that I would try in this kind of aggro space, or even try, of course, the Convoke deck again, given what Shane said about Bunnicorn and stuff like that instead.
I'm sad to see, Dave, that it wasn't blowing your mind, but keep on playing. I'm sure it'll go somewhere. But Devon, with a few minutes, we got a few minutes left, and you've been playing some Pioneer. Give us what kind of things are intriguing you, or that are playing well for you, or you think have some potential here in Pioneer.
So the 2 decks that I think have been the most impressive, we'll talk about a couple of them. The first up is Boggles. Now, for those of you who may remember Boggles of the past, I believe it was Madsen. I can't remember his full name, but did well at the Pro Tour. I think lost to Reed in the finals. Benson Madsen, that's who it was. And that's kind of where it was popularized. Now, the difference here, the new card that we have is Toadstool Admirer. Very simple card. 1 mana for a green mana for a 1/1. Has Ward 2, and you can pay 3 and a green to put a counter on it. That's it. Now, Ward 2, not not actually as good as, actual factual hexproof. We understand that. But what's nice about the Toadstool Admirer is, first of all, they can't Fatal Push it in the first 2 turns, because even if they have Fatal Push, they have to wait until they can pay the ward. So you're free to cook with the Toad in the first couple of turns. And against the decks that have red base removal, so against Izzet and things of that nature that only have shocks and damage base removal, it's not that hard to get it out of range of those shocks in, by turn 3 when you put your second or third aura on it. So, it does a really good impression of actual hexproof without actually being, real hexproof. And then the other notable thing about this card is it's another 1-drop, because before you were playing, I think it was the Saiba Cryptomancer, which was like blue and a 1 for an 0-1 flash hexproof that had backup. And, when it comes down to mulliganing with Boggles, there's so many matchups where you just need to have a 1-drop, and that high density of 1-drops is very important, I think.
Wow. Here's the thing I see when I look at this list. There's no SRAM.
No, you don't need it.
You don't need it anymore, because I guess with all the 1-drops, you are able to lean harder into Curious Obsession, which Benton was not running in his list, for example, back at that time. But you also are running Staggering Insight, which is a card that I've always enjoyed playing in blue-white auras, even though it's expensive. But the fact that you get to run 4 of each of those is like, you don't need the card draw engine to be on one of your creatures anymore, because you can equip your 1-drop with it. Is that that's where we're at?
Right. So the theory behind the way that the list is constructed is because you have those extra 1-drops, the draw spells are way more like the draw auras. When you're curving out with 1-drop into any of those draw auras, they're so much more impactful than when you're curving out with, say, Cyber Cryptomancer or SRAM into a draw aura on turn 3. When you're on the play with, like, say, 1-drop into a Curious Obsession, if your opponent doesn't have, or if they just don't have a creature or to block with, or anything, maybe even if they do, they might not be able to trade with it. You get in that 1 hit and it just like snowballs from there. So I think the composition of this deck means that you don't need to play SRAM anymore, and you can kind of lean the draw into the blue enchantments. And that's really what played out. The deck felt very, very good.
Oh, that's awesome. You can also, then your main 2-drop strategy is just Light Pause. And then you're like, okay, I'm just going to make a giant Light Pause when it's time for me to play that card.
That card's broken, by the way.
Yeah.
Like, if you untap with it, they are not getting another turn.
Yeah. I mean,
it's so good.
I've played lists in the past, and I think that Benton's list might even have had this, where you're like, giving haste to it, and then it really kind of goes wild when you're kind of making it giant with all the glitters, and then you get haste on it, and then you just swing in for immediately out of nowhere for a zillion points. So that's cool. I do like auras a lot in Pioneer, so maybe this is a good deck to go try out. I glanced at Toadstool Admirer on the spoiler list, and I was like, how good is Ward 2 going to be? Turns out, good enough when you just want to suit it up.
Yeah, I mean, it is noticeably worse against exactly Fatal Push. Right. So you do lose a little bit of percentage points against Rakdos. But, to be honest, the hands that didn't have Gladecover Scout, you probably weren't beating Rakdos anyways, because, like, unless you're on the play and you have turn 1 Gladecover Scout, they're just going to Thoughtseize your creature, and that matchup was kind of rough anyways. Yep. So, but what's very important is, like, against the matchups where you have to race, like green and stuff, you're just having a 1-drop at more frequency, and against those decks, Ward versus Hexproof doesn't matter. They don't have removal spells anyways.
Right. Yeah. And just getting on curve is better anyway, right? So,
yep.
Yeah. All right, well, let's hear about the other list that you had here on your kind of the last couple things you wanted people to know about.
This deck is so sick. So Naya Pia, which I spent a lot of time on Pia in the last season, and various versions of Boros Pia. So the new cards here, we'll talk about 3 of them. So the first one, I guess we could talk. Yeah, we'll talk about 3 of them. So the first one is Questing Druid. It's Seek the Beast is red and a colorless instant. Exile the top 2 until your next end step. You may play those cards. And then the Druid half is 2 mana 1/1. Whenever you play a spell that's white, blue, black, or red, you get a counter on it. This card, surprisingly, not that good. And wow. I think initially, I know, very surprising. What I started with was I took like the standard Pia list, which normally has 4 Impulse and 4 Ren's Resolve, and I just cut 2 of each and played 4 Seek the Beast. And I was like, well, I mean, it's really just Reckless Impulse, right? No, not right. Because specifically the wording on Questing Druid, it says, until your next end step, you may play those cards, compared to until the end of your next turn on Ren's Resolve and Reckless Impulse. Why is that important? Well, your deck plays 4 Showdown of the Scalds. And if you try to main phase the Seek the Beast to try and hit a land drop, and you happen to hit a Showdown, you're not going to be able to cast it that turn, and thus you're not going to be able to cast the Showdown next turn. You just lose it entirely. So, yeah, it really didn't work out for me. I think where Seek the Beast really belongs, and maybe it's like an entirely different deck, is you play like a lot more instant speed stuff, because casting it on your opponent's turn is fine because you're going to get to then untap and get all your mana to use the cards. But yeah, that one was a little surprising to me. I thought it was going to be very good, and turns out not as good as I thought it was.
Wow, that is surprising.
But on the other hand, Pollen Shield Hair, which is, I don't know if we talked about this one during the spoiler episode. I can't remember if I brought this one up. But let's just go over this one quickly for the listeners at home. Hair raising is the sorcery part of this. It's, raise your hair. What if I don't have any hair is the question. Green sorcery, target creature you control gains vigilance and +X/+X, where X is the number of creatures you control. And then the creature half is Pollen Shield Hair, 1 and a white for a 2/2 that says creature tokens you control get +1/+1. Now, with Pia, you're making a decent amount of tokens. You're not making like a ton, but a Pia and a couple activations there, you'd make 2 or 3 tokens. They all get +1/+1. It's pretty cool. But what's also like, it just works so perfectly with Pia because you get to cast the spell early, which is good because you're a Force Whisper, 4 Soulscar deck. So just having the Prowess trigger is good and pushes a little bit of damage early. And then you can set up a turn on turn 4 where you go, in the same turn, you go like Pia. Maybe you play a land from exile with a previous Reckless Impulse, and then you play the Pollen Shield Hair from exile, which, because you're casting it from adventure, still triggers Pia, which gives you a token, and that token has haste and gets +1/+1. So it's kind of like a really, really cool, like all package deal. And I was a really, really big fan of the hair in this deck. It was good.
That is fantastic. I did not think that this card was going to be good, but that's awesome to see.
Yeah, it doesn't look like a ton, but a big fan of it.
Devon, do you think if I like Prowess that I have not played Naya, I have not played Pia ever. Do you think that this is like the actual Prowess deck that is good, is something in this space? I love casting a lot of spells.
Oh yeah, I think you'd like this deck.
Okay.
Well, it's also like really sick too, because you can get these turns with Showdown where it's like Showdown kind of feels like it has Prowess when you get the Chapter 2.
Right.
Because every spell you cast, you're getting a counter on stuff. So it has like pseudo Prowess.
Showdown's a sweet
I think
card.
you'd like this deck.
Yeah.
It is. The last card that I wanted to talk about here, and I don't remember if we went over this one either. Torch the Tower. So this is red instant with Bargain. It says Torch the Tower deals 2 damage to target creature or planeswalker. If the spell was bargained, instead it deals 3, and you scry 1. And if that wasn't enough, if a permanent dealt damage by Torch the Tower would die this turn, exile it instead. That's a lot of text for a 1 mana, damage spell.
Seriously.
It's a lot. But very, very important because you, first of all, with Bargain, you have Pia tokens. So you have some random material to sack to Bargain. Totally fine. You're not losing a lot if you're sacking a token. And what's really nice is you get the guaranteed 3 damage, whereas previously these decks did play Fiery Impulse, but you need to have spells in the graveyard, so it's less guaranteed than having something to sacrifice to Bargain. And the exile clause at the very end is also massive because it helps you deal with stuff like Old Growth Troll and Cavalier of Thorns. There's a spot where I got into combat with a Prowess creature with like the Torch the Tower face up, and I was like, okay, if they block, that's fine. I'll just trade my creature and my torch. Their Cav will get exiled, and then I'll be fine. And it was pretty good. And also at the end of the day, can hit planeswalkers too, just in case. So really, really like that card a lot.
That's awesome.
Very cool.
But overall, good upgrades to Pia, and I can't wait to keep testing this deck. I think this is probably my favorite deck in the format right now.
I was just going to ask if this is the one that you like the most. That's cool to hear. See, I feel like looking at this now, and I saw during like the RCQ season, I wasn't playing a lot of Pioneer then because we were concentrating pretty heavily on Modern, but I saw people talking about this deck on Twitter at the time and feeling like, oh, that seems pretty cool. I wonder exactly how it works. But now listening to you talk about it, I'm like, oh yeah, this is the new version of I'm going to cast a bunch of spells and try to just do something broken and fast, which I think is right up my alley. So I will probably give it a try.
Yeah, in previous lists, you might even be more happy with the ones that were playing Runaway Steamkin, because I don't know if you have ever tried to or have ever untapped with a Showdown of the Scalds on Chapter 2 in a Steamkin.
No.
But it goes kind of crazy.
That's funny. Awesome.
Love it. My friends, this is a packed episode. Devon, it's great to have you back on talking about all the stuff that you actually get some time to play with. And I'm amped to keep playing. Like, I like the aggressive decks that we were talking about, Bogles and Pia and the Convoke deck, and everything we talked about in Pioneer was actually quite aggressive.
That's
so
interesting.
I'm all for it. And man, I think as a Tron player, I need to try out Coffers a few times and maybe get addicted to Shielded plus the One Ring. But I think that this wraps up this week's show. Of course, check out Doomwake on his regular stream on twitch.tv/D00MWAKE. Always an excellent stream. Great community. I love checking that out during the day when I'm at work sometimes. I love hanging out, but then I have a meeting and I have to leave and I forget to come back. But if you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to the pod. You get latest episodes as soon as they come out. If you use Apple Podcasts, feel free to leave us a rating and a review on the Spotify. That's called Spotify. You can answer the default question. And if there's some interesting comments there, if on each episode you can answer a question like, what do you think about this episode? Anything interesting there, we will read out as well. You don't have to have an Apple Podcast account to hear your name on the pod. If you want to submit a question or reach out to us in some way, shape, or form, you can give us a tweet at the Dive Down, all one word. You can shoot us an email, thedivedown@gmail.com. If you want to support us directly, you can go to patreon.com/thedivedown or check out the store at thedivedown.com/store. Our sponsors, we have a lot of good ones. Heavyplay.com. You can go get some incredible deck and dice boxes, play mats, all featuring the Equip Mag system. Using code the Divedown 2023 gets you 10% off your order there. Mana Traders sponsors the Dive Down. You get 2 months off of, you get 10% off of your first 2 months using promo code the Divedown 23. And you can get some amazing shaving soaps, body soaps, fragrances, and more at Barrister and Man using that same code, the Divedown 23, for 15% off your first order. And of course, Nerve Rage Gaming gives our listeners 8% off their order using code DIVE8. As always, thanks to the bands Nowhere and Spaceblood for letting us use their music. And until next week, get out there and eat some beans.
How many more beans do you want me to put in the show notes?
It's amazing.
How many do we have?
Just 2 so
you
far.
You just keep moving
Just
the
2.
bean.
He makes them
Okay.
bigger and
I added
smaller
one
too.
more.
It's too free. Too free for the bean.
I got to tell you, if you ever want a secret recipe for chili, put baked beans in your chili. Just saying. It's
That does
amazing.
sound good.
It's amazing.